With a population of 57.6 million people, the northeastern United States is one of the most densely populated regions in the country. Home to the booming consumer economies and city centers of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, as well as a large-scale industrial infrastructure from seaports to energy refineries, there is lots of freight and people to be moved in and out of this area. Railroads are an important part of this transportation process, from Amtrak, CSX, and Norfolk Southern to their shortline partners. Upstate New York is one of two railroad gateways to the northeast megapolis, with a sizable percentage of rail traffic bound for NYC and Philadelphia, and all traffic bound for southern New England passing through the region. Lines from Norfolk Southern, CSX, and shortline Berkshire and Eastern all converge in the state's capital region, making this area an important railroad gateway to the northeast. Before products hit consumer shelves in the country's biggest cities, they pass through much smaller towns on this important highway of commerce. Today, we'll look at the railroads of upstate New York's capital region and the role they play in keeping a vital part of America's economy running. To start off the day, we are in the farm town of St. Johnsville, New York, on the CSX Mohawk subdivision. Fresh out of the New York City area with containers from overseas is train I-159 with imported goods from the massive Port Newark destined for consumers' shelves across the country. Up next in St. Johnsville are two of Amtrak's daily medium-distance trains through this area, the westbound Maple Leaf to Toronto and the eastbound 284 Empire service to New York City from Niagara Falls. With 4 trains running in each direction daily along this line, Amtrak is an important link for people connecting upstate communities with the city center downstate. Moving east 9 miles to Palatine Bridge, our next train is Hotshot Intermodal I-003, carrying domestic stacks and UPS mail west from the New York City area. The Mohawk subdivision is a portion of the CSX Chicago line and the former New York Central water level route that runs east from Syracuse, New York to Hoffmans, New York, where the line splits, with Amtrak's Hudson line continuing to Albany and the CSX Selkirk branch continuing to the railroad's massive Selkirk hump yard. At Selkirk, all CSX manifest traffic bound for the northeast is sorted and switched before being sent to its final destination. East of Selkirk, CSX has lines that branch south to New Jersey and New York City, and east to Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine on former Conrail and Pan Am trackage. I will discuss more on Pan Am later in the video, and will be coming out with a video going into detail on the Selkirk terminal in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. Up next is autorack train M216 with a YN2 solo leader and a cut of gondolas ahead of the autoracks. The first few cars are catching a ride on this unit train to Selkirk with the rest of the autoracks eventually bound for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The train will be re-symboled in Selkirk to M218 for the rest of the trip south. While railroads are typically ideal for reducing automotive traffic, the contents of these cars will soon be purchased by residents of the most densely populated region of the United States, adding traffic to already packed highways. Up next, we have our first New Englander of the day. Fresh out of Worcester, Massachusetts, priority train I-019 is on its way to Syracuse with mail and merchandise from the Boston area. M381 is next through town with a manifest train out of Selkirk Yard bound for Syracuse, a short trip of about 150 miles this morning. Most of this consist is eventually bound for Montreal, Quebec. The majority of cars on 381 this morning were dropped off at the Berkshire and Eastern Interchange in Rotterdam Junction, New York, which we will visit later. Those cars will be switched by the B&E and brought into New England the following day. Our last train at Palatine Bridge and the polar opposite of the short manifest we just saw, M364 comes through with a massive train for Selkirk. At Selkirk, M364 will be broken up as cars are organized to eventually depart on trains bound for destinations all over the Northeast, from Portland, Maine to the Bronx, New York, and Newark, New Jersey. We now relocate another 12 miles east to the town of Fonda, where Amtrak's Lakeshore Limited greets us heading for Albany. This is the full-length consist of the train, which will be split up in Albany, with the first half of the train proceeding east to Boston and the rear half proceeding south to New York City. Behind Amtrak is CSXB 741, a loaded ethanol train heading for the coastal refineries of New Jersey. A big business for railroads in the Northeast, these ethanol trains originate on other railroads in the Midwest, making them prime candidates for foreign power, and today is no different. North Jersey, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, and Albany all have large-scale ethanol terminals, making these trains extremely common on the Mohawk subdivision, all going their respective ways once they reach Selkirk. Finishing off our time on the Mohawk sub, Amtrak 281 speeds west towards Syracuse and Niagara Falls. Our next stop as we get closer to the heart of the capital region is Rotterdam Junction, where Berkshire and Eastern, formerly Pan Am Southern Railways, interchanges with CSX. Action was busy here as the B&E had a road freight arriving in their yard. Rotterdam Junction is the western terminus of the Berkshire and Eastern. Their yard runs parallel to the CSX Selkirk subdivision before tying into the line at CPRJ. CSX uses road freights, like the M381 that we saw earlier, to pick up and drop off the cars for B&E. On the B&E side, they run trains RJED and EDRJ between here and their classification yard in East Deerfield, Massachusetts, a few times a week, the latter of which is the train arriving this afternoon. Powering today's EDRJ were two of the last four active Pan Am SD40-2s, a railroad that had once rostered a large fleet of the type. This would be one of their final trips on the B&E as the old EMDs were turned over to CSX in early 2025, who had acquired them through their purchase of Pan Am in 2022. The end of six-axle EMDs on the former Boston and Maine was truly the end of an era, and sitting in between them on EDRJ was their replacement, big wide-cab C40-8Ws bought by B&E's owner Genesee in Wyoming to take over their duties, which look sharp in their new orange paint. Another C40-8 also tags along for the ride to complete the consist. Change is one constant on the railroad, and I will be documenting the full shift from Pan Am Southern to Berkshire and Eastern operations in an upcoming video. But for now, let's enjoy this last stand of Pan Am's EMD 6-axles. EDRJ pauses short of the road crossing to cut the power off of its train and pull into one of the yard tracks to tie down the set. With the power now out of the way on a yard track, B&E RJ1, the Rotterdam Junction switcher, lines the switches and backs onto EDRJ to pull the consist into the yard with another of Pan Am's final SD40-2s for power. As RJ1 builds its heir, we can't help but marvel at the fact that this engine, built in 1975, was about to pull 80 cars all by itself, a true testament to the durability and ruggedness of the EMD SD40-2. Pretty soon, RJ1 was underway, lugging EDRJ into the yard. As RJ1 tucks the final cars of its consist away into the yard, it was time for us to head out, but we didn't make it far before the Capital Region's third freight railroad made itself known over the radio. Stopping in Rotterdam, just a few miles away, NS train 30T was making its way south, passing underneath the CSX Selkirk subdivision heading for Binghamton, New York. The freight subdivision is former Delaware and Hudson trackage that NS bought from Canadian Pacific in 2015. It connects with CPKC trackage in Schenectady, where trains can either turn north towards Canada or continue east towards Mechanicville, New York, and the B&E to New England, over which NS has trackage rights to serve the region. 30T is coming down from the Canadian side with interchange traffic from both CN and CPKC in the consist, the latter of which was picked up in Saratoga Springs, New York. While NS and B&E are important players in getting freight into the busy northeastern region, CSX is still king in upstate New York with far and away the most traffic to move. Back along the Selkirk subdivision now in the suburban town of Voorheesville, CSX has traffic lined up with intermodal train I-157 out of Baltimore and Philadelphia coming first. I-157 typically originates out of Philadelphia, but has been extended to Baltimore as part of CSX's efforts to reroute trains and traffic around its Howard Street tunnel through the city, which is currently closed while it is rebuilt to handle double-stack containers. We hung out at Voorheesville for two more trains, which arrived at the same time. Coming first was I-104 with a massive train of intermodal containers for the NYC market. I-104 has also since been extended to Baltimore to help with the Howard Street Tunnel reroutes. Meeting the stacked train in Voorheesville is empty autorack train M267 with a solo SD70 Mac rebuild leading. Four dedicated autorack trains use the Mohawk subdivision every day, and they are typically massive, usually approaching 2 miles in length, providing quite the test for this solo unit on M267 this evening. Depending on their origin or terminus across the Northeast, automobiles on these trains are either loaded onto ships for export or transported to local dealerships to be purchased by residents of the Northeast. And by the looks of these trains, auto business is booming. Our day trackside would end with M267, but we'd be back out upstate 9 days later for a couple more trains to finish off this brief tour of the region. Snow had fallen during the Christmas week upstate, and we were back out on the Mohawk subdivision as 2 more ethanol tank trains were coming east, running back-to-back, bound for East Coast refineries. With the added bonus of some great power on both of them, CSX B779 was first to arrive with a mile of tanks off of the Union Pacific bound for Seawarren, New Jersey. With only about 90 on their roster, and Union Pacific being the only railroad to have purchased these units, the lead EMD SD70 AH-T4 locomotive was a real treat on this B779. Not to be outdone, 20 minutes behind the B779 was ethanol train B705, this one originating on the Canadian National and bound for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They had a CN-SD75I leading and the EJ&E Heritage unit trailing second. Quite the duo of tank trains out here today on CSX. The Elgin, Joliet, and Eastern Railway, commonly referred to as the J, existed from 1889 until 2009 when it was merged into CN as a subsidiary. It ran through Illinois and Indiana and served as a link between Class I railroads in the Chicago area. CN painted this ET44AC in 2020 to honor the railroad, and it sure looks good in its bright orange scheme. With high traffic volume and the convergence of major rail lines from many operators, Upstate New York serves as a major railroad gateway to the most densely populated region of the United States, with dozens of trains carrying goods and people into and out of the massive markets of this megapolis every day. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at the vital railroad infrastructure in this area that helps America's economy tick, and I thank you for watching.